Speaker, ending the night in style. Gary, no pressure at all. We've got Gary Denton, who's the Managing Director of Icon Training, who's going to exploring if and also how the sector might need to professionalise in order to meet the challenge of inactivity. So please welcome Gary.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to pick up on what Tara said earlier on. If you think the conversation starter about sport and that, try coupling apprenticeships and sport in the same conversation and see how far you get at a party. Not very far. Okay, right, so I'm going to start off with a story. Once upon a time, there was a man who went to the beach every day. He went there to do his writing, and walking down the beach one morning, he came down after a heavy storm the night before. On the beach was thousands of starfish. And as he was walking down the beach, he could see this figure in the distance, occasionally walking towards him, bending down. And he thought, what's going on there? I'm going to go and explore that. So he walked further towards his figure. As he got closer towards his figure, he realised it was a young girl. And this young girl was going across all the starfish, trying to find ones that were alive. When she found a starfish that was alive, she bent down, she picked it up and she threw it in the sea. This old man thought this was intriguing. I'm going to go and talk to this girl. So he went to talk to this girl. He said, what are you doing? She said, well, I'm throwing starfish back in the sea to try and save them. His immediate response was, but there's thousands of them. I'm afraid to say you won't make any difference. The girl then bent down, picked up a starfish, threw it as hard as she could back in the sea. And she turned around and said, it made all the difference for that starfish. Now, why I've told that story is I got into the industry of sport and physical activity because I wanted to make a difference. But to be honest, I've met that attitude of you can't make that much difference on your own. But I would argue that each and every one of you have made a huge difference to all the people that you've touched. That's why you're in this industry. That's why you're in this sector, because you love it, you're passionate. Part of the problem is all too often, as Tara and Simon have alluded to, our sector is looked upon as a sector that can't have a great impact. And I think that's a terrible thing that we really need to address, and everyone has picked up on that today. We need to challenge that. I come from that from a perspective of education, so skills, apprenticeships. So when I see this guy, and I use this slide all the time because it's something, the first time I saw it, I've stuck to it and I believe in it. This quote from Nelson Mandela: education is the most powerful weapon which we can use to change the world. Absolutely agree with everything these guys have said. If we put education into more people in our workforce, we can make a difference and we can make a change for the good. But we've got to do some things to get there. So, we're talking about physical education, we're talking about physical activity, we're talking about sport. So, let's define what that actually means. You should have heard this plenty of times, you'll have seen this diagram plenty of times before. What it comes down to is the basic equation of expenditure of calories. Okay? We all move, just some of us less than others. What we've got to do is get to the Chief Medical Officer's prescription of at least 150 minutes over a week in 10-minute bursts. Not a huge challenge, right? I think you'll all agree that that's a challenge that we can agree to. Agree? Can we agree? Yeah, thank you. There we go. Good. So, that's the basic thing that we've got to get to. Now, research out there, you'll have heard it all the time, is that a third of adults across the world don't meet that, which is pretty horrific. But actually, when you look at the developing world versus the developed world, it gets even worse than that. So there is a huge challenge that we've got to take on to move that forward. So, let's look at that in a bit more depth. Of the people doing physical activity, there's about 20% of the developed world to 25% of the developed world that are doing physical activity that meets the rigours of the Chief Medical Officer. When you actually look at that, sport accounts for about 35% of those. Nothing we should sniff at, that's great. But actually, there's 65% that aren't doing sport. They're doing other forms of physical activity. And that's only of the 25% that are active. So when you actually look at it, there's lots of people that are outside the remit of just sport that need education, they need support, they need activity. So what are those people? These people, couch dwellers. There's lots of them. We all do that occasionally, but these are the guys that really need the challenge. And actually, again, the stat that horrifies me when you look at the research is that physical inactivity is the 4th biggest cause of death in the world. And again, when you actually compare that to developing world versus the developed world, it's pretty dire. When you look at it, it's just about moving to keep people healthy and active. That's a real challenge. And we talked about mental health and how mental health can actually be benefited by physical activity, the level of depression that drops. And I actually stood up on stage last time I was here and talked about the impacts it had on my life and my family through the depression that my father had suffered. I've seen it. I can see what it does. But why do we overlook it? It kind of bamboozles me sometimes. So what I came to when I was looking at this, I decided I'd have a look at a bit of research and came across some fantastic research. Unfortunately, not a lot for our sector. And this is one of the statements that I actually came up against. To take a second to read it. Key problem is that while there has been a succession of high-profile claims made about the role of fitness, professionals in physical activity for health agendas, little is known about the capacity of this group, realistically, to deliver these agendas or types of education and training processes that would support them to be effective. Okay, and you think, well, okay, what's that statement? The thing that caught me out, and the reason it's in bold, is however effectiveness is defined. The problem is, this agenda that we're all being asked to tackle and that we talk about regularly is so hard to define. Every one of you in this room will have a different reaction to physical activity. Okay, it won't be stable across the population. It's quite hard to define how that works. So actually, sometimes it's a target which is quite hard to hit, hence why we struggle with it. And I'll go a bit more into where this research came from in a minute. So, squeaky voice there. Exercise pill. Those of you who went to the UK Active Conference in 2016, NHS stood up, held up a bottle and said, in this bottle is a pill, it's exercise. It can do wonders for us. So, is exercise the magic pill? Are we the magic pill? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. The research says, undoubtedly, yes, we are the answer. The question is, that we need to ask ourselves, if we are, could we cope? There's, again, pockets of really good activity that's happening out there. The results are fantastic. The problem is there's not enough of it, and there's not enough people who have the ability to help tackle this agenda. Okay? Now, why am I tabling that? The research that has been done in pockets by sport and physical activity sector. But again, the research shows that it's incoherent and it's not actually trying to measure a fixed point. So what it's telling us is that our sector as such has not defined what we're trying to achieve. Going back again to that research showing that the goals that we're trying to hit is hard to define. Now, the best piece of research that I could find on our sector was commissioned by Public Health. It wasn't even commissioned by our sector. I've put this up there, and I put the link up, because knowing that this goes out to all of you afterwards, take the time to read this, because it's interesting. It's actually fascinating. The question I've got is, why is Public Health doing research on exercise and fitness professionals? Why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we commissioning our own research that hits protocols to validate the research? Why is someone else doing that? That's a question we need to ask ourselves. So, moving on from that, in that report, it loosely describes how it defines the sector. Whether we agree with that or not, that's how it's perceived at Public Health, which is government level. There's sport. Then there's leisure facilities. And then there's community-based activities. What it says in this report is that, jumping up and down there, sport coaching and PE teachers has a fantastic research base, and it proves that it has a positive effect on the population. What it says is for the other two, there's no research of any valid standpoint, so it doesn't actually define that actually it's a sector worth relating to. So public health, don't think it's a sector that's worth necessarily working with at the moment, because it can't see the base of which it's going to support when it actually gets involved with it. Doesn't know who it's working with. Doesn't see what opportunity it provides in terms of addressing that exercise pill, because it can't see where the education and skills within that workforce actually fits and whether it's fit for purpose. That's what it says. This isn't me saying that, that's what the report says. And again, going back to what Tara says earlier on, I find that disgusting. Because actually, every day, all of you are that little girl picking up those starfish, or boy, picking up those starfish and throwing them back in the sea. You're doing a fantastic job, but we're just not doing it to the rigours of what government sees. So, I just sat there and after reading this and thought I would throw some questions out to you as the audience, not to answer now, but to think on, to start pondering. So, the first question I've got to ask is, that's how it defined the sector in there. How do we define our sector? Are we in those three bubbles? So Tara asked some questions at the start of where we are, what we do. Do we sit in those bubbles? Are we actually a sector? Are we unified, or do we see ourselves in different pockets? Questions that I'm asking because actually where I sit from an education standpoint, I do work with each of those three bubbles, and I see very different priorities when I see each one. There's nothing wrong with that, but actually the level of cohesion is quite hard, and I'm sure Tara will agree, when actually she's working with a lot of the organisations trying to pull together some of the training, it's quite hard. Herding cats sometimes probably is a phrase I would use. Next question. Are we all under one sector? Do we want to work differently? Okay. Do we want to work together? Do we want to be in the sports sector together to lobby ourselves forward? Which part of physical activity spectrum do we want to define as our responsibility? Is it just sport, coaching and activity? Is it just running leisure facilities? Is it just working community-based activity? Or do we actually want to say, from a physical activity spectrum, tackling inactivity? Not the most inactive as a priority, but the whole thing from the most inactive to the most active. Do we want to take that full spectrum on? Is it our responsibility? Do we want it? If we had a coherent and joined up vision for the future of our sector, would the current workforce be fit to deliver it? There's a question. So if we say we're going to take on the most inactive, and then those people that are active that don't quite fit the 150 minutes, do we have all the skill sets required to tackle the volume of it? So Simon talked about the inactivity in his in the West Midlands. Do we have all the skills in the workforce to actually tackle that question to answer? And last question, if we don't have the skills, what skills and qualification development needs to take place to ensure we can deliver that future vision? So once we've even defined our vision of what we want to do, how are we going to develop the workforce underneath to do it? And again, SIMPS was doing a fantastic work of trying to do that, but it's not enough. That's no slur on SIMPS, but it's the fact that we're not actually getting behind it to move that agenda forward. So we talk about it and we want to do it. We've all got to get together to do it. So again, that level of cohesion that we need to bring to the table in order to move it forward. So those are questions for ourselves. Questions for others outside of this. What do the government really want? What do they want from us? What do we want from them? Have we really had that conversation? We've talked about the magic pill. We've talked about tackling inactivity. We've talked about getting to the medical guidelines. But actually, what do they want from us? Do we really know that? And is it consistent across the board? I put up there, sorry, I'll go back one. It can't just be about money. I've had lots of conversations where I've sat in think tanks and public meetings where we've talked about we need more money. You're not going to get any more money. That's the reality. So we've got to find a way to do it with our means that we've currently got. So I've covered that one already, jumped ahead. How do we go about influencing government? Here's a question. And when I put this question up there, it's no coincidence that the arts budget is twice to 3 times, depending on the measurement you use, of the sport and physical activity budget of government. Reality for that is because they've got a really strong lobbying body and a lot of politicians actually like art. And when you look at the numbers of politicians that subscribe to sport, it's a lot less. Probably there's a reason why those budgets are less. Slightly cynical me saying that, but it's true. The reason that is because we don't lobby hard enough. We don't have a consistent lobbying body. We've got SIMSPA, we've got UK Active, we've got Sport and Rec Alliance, we've got others, all talking and trying to get that message across. But the message isn't consistent. The message isn't pushing hard enough. We've got to challenge that. We've got to get together to work on that agenda and try and move it forward. And again, the pockets of great examples of what's going on out there, we've got to use more of them. Stuff that Yvonne's doing. We've got to use that. We've got to then actually lobby on it and get it carte blanche across the sector once we've defined what we want to do. Then another question, what's our relationship with the health sector? So we've had Simon Stevens from NHS stand up and say it's the magic pill. But what is our actual relationship with the health sector? In pockets good, pretty much for the most part non-existent. And again, I've sat in rooms, I won't quote who said it, but public health said, not interested in working with you, we've got our own problems. Pretty angry. So, some of you might remember this sketch from the 2 Ronnies. I'll sit there and say you've got government as John Cleese, and the arts probably. Then you've got public health, and right at the bottom there, how we're perceived as a sector, given very little validation. Ronnie Corbett. Cynical, probably true. And again, these guys have talked about it. Although it's important, we're not yet credible enough to move this agenda forward, and it's only going to happen by us working together. Okay, that's my rant over. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually do a little quiz on you guys. So actually I'm going to ask you to get your doofers, as they were tabled. Your options are 1 and 2 only, so it's fairly easy. We've got a question. So, here's the question. Do we have the competencies in our workforce to get more people more active more often across the whole of our population? Think about what I'm talking about here. I'm not just talking about active people that are interested. I'm talking about the whole population, from the most inactive to the active. So 1 for yes, 2 for no. Vote. Okay, we think we've stabilised our responses, and the answer is no, is the resounding answer there. We don't feel we have the competencies in our workforce to get more people more active more often. That's pretty telling. That the people in this room that are passionate about what we do think we don't have the competencies to work to actually get everyone active. But we say that we want to tackle that challenge of being the exercise pill. 2 more questions. Next question. Do we have the qualifications available to train our workforce to address the problem associated with inactivity? Please vote. We had 101 votes last time, still got 4 people waiting to vote. Or we've got abstainees this time. Okay, let's have a look at the result on this one. Ooh, good. Okay, and again, I will agree with that, because actually the work that the likes of SIMSPA are doing is actually starting to address this, starting to move it forward. But we've still got a long way to go. Okay, but we're not going to achieve it overnight, and we're not going to achieve it by just letting SIMSPA do it on their own. Fact. Last question. Do we have enough funding available to get more people more active more often across the whole population? There we go, 101 again. Let's have a look at the results. No. Everyone says no. I would sit there and say, I disagree with that because there is a huge amount of funding out there. But to get that funding, we've got to actually start working together because we've all got our own pots of funding. Schools budgets, local authority budgets, transport, active travel, many more than I can sit there and say that actually they've all got remits, as Simon's talked about, for physical activity. So we've got to start working together to get access to that funding. And I'll leave you with that quote to sit there and say, if we keep doing what we're doing, we ain't going to get any further forward. Thank you very much.